Sabashiya bazale kaya.
Sagenda wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu.
Sabashiya bazale kaya.
Sagenda wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu.
Sati salan, salan.
Sagenda wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu.
Sati salan, salan.
Sagenda wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu lebo.
Tambo,
Sogene pito.
tambo.
Sesifuma wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu lebo.
Tambo,
Sogene pito.
tambo.
Sesifuma wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu lebo.
Sabashiya bazale kaya.
Sagenda wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu lebo.
Sabashiya bazale kaya.
Sagenda wamanya maswe.
Wamanya maswe.
Nako ungazi konu babano mama sangeli konu lebo.
Good afternoon, Bagoichu. Siphinde sinamukele this afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. This is eThekwini PRC TV. Siyazi sonke ukuthi the title of this program, it's about people who make Durban tick. Our city is what it is because of them. As we said yesterday, it is not because of things, but the spirits, the brains, the activism of our people make the city what it is. And we take a backseat and appreciate them and get to know them better through this program. Izolo ke sibe naye uzodwa wabantu saba ne-discussion enkulu kabi kabi. Nakusasa futhi sizobe sinolele tikhumalo who needs no introduction. Njoba sazi ke sonke nosisi noNgcebo Mackenzie bela bekhuluma kwi-Creative Couch ngezinto futhi eyithintayo na the city. But today I am extremely excited that I have one of the people who actually sacrificed himself, his career, and also personal relations, and for that matter, his own family, because of the love he had for the people of the city and the people of this country and humanity in general. A man really who needs no introduction. He comes from a very famous family with very famous brothers, and he also is in his own right a very famous man. Comrade Moe, good afternoon and welcome to this show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to speak to people from Durban again.
We are extremely excited to have you. I must also indicate I have a friend here who is giving me company on my left-hand side, and that is Mandla Ganozulu. Firstly, I want to thank you for deciding to sit down and write this book. And actually, you remind me of what Nkosazana Zuma said when she addressed one of the meetings, say, in Durban. She spoke about the importance of writing our own stories and write them the way we want. We decide to project our own history the way that we deem fit. And we have done what I think we still need to encourage many leaders and comrades to please sit down and write the stories, more especially of our liberation heritage. Because if we don't write these stories, it means generations to come are not going to understand what we faced during our times and what this country went through and how the changes were introduced. That is by way of introduction, and I apologize up front because I want to make quite a comment so that I can hear what you have to say about it. Reading your book, something struck me, and this thing says to me there is no bigger event in South Africa that has happened than that of our liberation struggle. And therefore, our liberation struggle is the biggest heritage ever that you can have here. And also, furthermore, there is nothing that will ever happen, I dare say, in our country that will actually bring that South Africanness among all of us, different racial groups and classes. Because we shared this space, we faced a similar problem, and then we engaged in order for us to dismantle apartheid. And that on its own, it made us, especially those who were on the side of the oppressed, to be part of the same and therefore united in that. So that is why I think I derive my identity through you and your activism. The stories that you wrote, some of them weaved through my own stories. For instance, the story of Pinda Ndwandwe. I worked with her. When she was eliminated, it was exactly the same time that I was working with her. And also the stories of young boys from Wamashu who end up being killed. All along, I thought they killed themselves because our bombs at the time had been doctored. But then through your story, for instance, one of them is Gift or Vus Mjali, even though the surname, if it's him, is written like it's a sort of surname. Then, what I want to ask you after making that comment, how do you interpret the liberation struggle? What sort of person did it make out of you? And how did you, out of those experiences, develop a consciousness that probably gave you an identity about yourself and your belonging to South Africa, and also your identity in relation to any other person of different colors and class and religion in this country?
Temenkosi, thank you so much for the introduction. And I must tell you that I agree completely with Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma that we must write our own stories. And I think we have a powerful story to tell. A story of South Africans who were willing to commit the greatest sacrifices ever in order to liberate the country from apartheid. And it is in the telling of those stories that the future generations will come to know about what it is to be a South African. They will come to know about how it is that there is times in any society's development, like the very one that we're having now with the coronavirus, where it is very important for us to develop a higher consciousness, a consciousness that gives meaning to our lives beyond our own needs. And I think that is the story of our liberation struggle, that the people in South Africa and the vast majority of the people in South Africa were willing to take on with sticks and stones, and then later with MK's weapons. We were willing to take on the might of the apartheid state in order to build a new society, in order to build a society in which we will no longer be discriminated against race. We will build a society in which all of our potential can be used for the betterment of our society. And that has been, for me, the defining consciousness of the African National Congress. And the magic of the African National Congress, as I'm sure it was in other liberatory movements, that once you joined the organization, you joined a cause that was greater than yourself.
Yeah.
You came to learn about anti-racism. You came to learn how we, each of us, must deal with our own prejudices that we have. And that is what consciousness and active engagement in the struggle does. It gives you a, a perspective of a world. It gives you a perspective of things that you would not normally have sitting by yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
It is only when you engage with comrades and you come to understand things, when you read things, and when you practice that from theory into action, that your consciousness develops. And I think the ANC was remarkable as an organization in that regard, that it got each generation was mentored the generation after them, and we created a long tradition of each one teach one, and that is what made the ANC such a powerful organization.
Sure.
And I was proud to be groomed by the ANC in my own political thinking.
Sure. I would like us to get back to this because we are making very important statements. But I also noted that as part of your foreword, you talk about your two kids, a boy and a girl. And to a girl, you give her a
Yes.
message. You say, well, with your son, you said you'd love him to appreciate poetry like Gibran. And then your daughter, if she can find love, just like Kay did. Would you like to say briefly, what sort of love are you talking about, Kay? Why do you hold Kay as a symbol of love to an extent that you will wish if your daughter were to find love the same way that Kay did?
In classical words, what people use was my stepmother.
Yes.
So she was not the woman who gave birth to me. And she married my father when he had 5 boys living with him. Now, and we were all little boys. So here was a woman marrying a man with 5 boys. Now, and to show love to someone who is not your children as a mother is a remarkable, it's a remarkable feature and a remarkable definition of love in my view. And she, Kay, never accepted for us to be referred to as her stepchildren, and she never referred to herself as stepmother.
Yeah.
So for her, those terms did not exist. We were her children. Even though we did not come from her, she made sure that she gave us all the love as if we were hers. So for me, that was a very powerful definition of love. And remember, this was a hard time. It was a time in working class life and in the apartheid, which was not easy. And then when we got detained, she took on the sacrifices of the struggle as her sacrifices. She would pester the security branch. She was not going to accept that her children were going to be incarcerated without her doing something about it. So in the book, I tell the story of how she was really responsible for changing the mindset of the Nightingale, which became a very useful person in the ANC's intelligence. Yeah. So, and then for my son, I always loved the poetry of Khalil Gibran. He writes very poetry, beautiful poetry, and I named my son Gibran after him in the hope that my son will one day also come to reflect the beauty of poetry that Khalil Gibran did.
Yeah. Going back to these very important tales that you are telling about your two children, you also, even though in not many sentences, made a statement about your physical mother now. And then you mentioned that one day, you were still too young to understand, one day she woke up and went out of your lives. Your dad didn't know what happened to her, where she went, and nobody spoke about it. Is there any feeling of emptiness, more especially in relation to you, that may have left you with? And probably, if there was Kay able to close it with the love that she gave? As you said, she came and your father had 5 of you, and it seemed number 6. Was there any impact, and were you able to deal with that impact, whatever the effect it had in you during the course of your life?
Yes, let me go back then to my maternal mother, the mother that gave birth to me. She left my dad and us when we were all very young. And as I say in the book, when I was 2 years old. And she left and she went back to Johannesburg. And then on a trip that she was making back from Johannesburg to Durban, there was an accident and she died as a result of that accident. So yes, but my dad never spoke to us about why she left, what were the issues, who was responsible, was he responsible, was she responsible, and I think generally that not talking about it, no matter how hard we tried to discuss it with him, he kept that door shut.
Sure.
So it remained a secret, and I got attracted to secrets.
Yes.
From trying
That
to
was going to be my
understand
next point.
why did she leave,
Yeah.
right? But the feeling that was left in me for a long while was the feeling of being abandoned. I didn't have the courage. I didn't have the courage before to say it like that. But now, when I think back on it, I think many of my own particular challenges that I may have had in my own relationship with women have been around my fear of abandonment, and it did feature in my own therapy about dealing with abandonment.
Sure.
Let me also then say that Kay was a remarkable woman that made us feel, feel the love in a home. But yes, as you grow up, because of the particular relationship, the relationship between mothers and sons is a very particular
Yes,
relationship.
I know from experience. Yeah.
Psychologists say that men learn their relationship to women from their mothers, and girls learn their relationship to their partners from their fathers.
Sure.
So this relationship, I mean, I see the mother-son relationship in the relationship between my wife Erin and my son Gibran. It's a very special relationship, you know. It's difficult for fathers to enter that relationship
Yes.
between a mother and a son. So I think from the mother, the son learns the sensitivity, learns the way to speak to other women, learns the way of what kind of relationship they must have with women.
Sure.
So I think in that sense, I had to learn these things much later in life. And to the extent that Kay could help us navigate those difficult questions as boys, she did, and for which I am forever grateful.
We then thank Kay, because otherwise we're going to lose such a treasure in you that we later on had in our lives. Now, coming to your book, the title. Why this title? How did you get to the title of your book?
Well, the original title that I had for the book was The Cries of the Nightingale. And the publishers, when they did a check of the names all over, they felt that the title Cries of the Nightingale may not give the real impression, because apparently people look at the title of the book before they
That's
decide
correct.
to purchase it or whatever. So a little bit of marketing was done on the matter, and they then proposed the title The ANC Spy Bible. And of course, the title Bible is very important in the context of the story, because, as I say in the book, that title was the project by which we were engaged in was called the Bible, was so called by uh, Oliver Tambo, who named the documents that he's seen to be as true as the Bible. And we'll all know that Oliver Tambo himself was very spiritual
Yes,
and a very
yeah.
religious person.
So basically, the book's name was Christine by none other than that doyen of our struggle, Oliver Reginald Tambo. Now,
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
coming back to this more, um, getting into one part of the book, there was this something that you also discuss, and it runs through, at least in my view, from the beginning of the book until during discussions in Codesa. And that was Section 29 of the Internal Security Act. Would you like, more especially for those who don't have the experience of what this Section 29 meant, to deal with it, more especially in relation to three characters that you are talking about in your book? And that is Botha, the English investigator, I've forgotten his name now, from the security branch, the one that offered to take you out for lunch the other day, and then lastly, the bathroom officer. But and also, if you can discuss that in the context of what Mandela once said, he said, oppression brutalizes both the oppressor and the oppressed. Can you deal with this theme of Section 29 within those contexts in your book?
So, Section 29 of the Internal Security Act of 1982 was a follow up of the Section 6 of the Terrorism Act.
Sure.
So, in the 1970s, people were detained under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act. And you'll remember, Temungosi, that Steve Biko was killed under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act. As a result of the outcry of Section 6 of the Terrorism Act, the Internal Security Act was then promulgated and became law in the country. Now, by the time I was detained under Section 29, and I make the point in my book, about 76 people were already killed under Section 29 of the Security Act. And Section 29, just to tell you, is that you were kept incommunicado. And incommunicado means you can speak to nobody. You will have contact with no one, not your family, not the lawyers, nobody. And you are completely at the mercy of the security branch for the purposes of interrogation. And only when the security branch decides that no further purpose can be obtained by having you detained, then only would you get released, or you'll get charged, or you could get a banning order, etc. So Section 29 was to keep you under the conditions of solitary confinement. So you were kept under solitary confinement in your cell, taken out for 1 hour from your cell into another area where you are still alone to have 1 hour exercise, and then you were put back into your cell. And then the only other time you were taken out was for your purposes of interrogation. So Section 29 had at its basis solitary confinement as a means of psychological torture, and you had to, stay alone by yourself. And again, you'll notice that the one comparison I can give, which is really not a comparison, and that is the COVID-19 lockdown.
Sure.
We're all in our homes.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to go out. But I must tell you, COVID-19 lockdown is house arrest. It's not even solitary confinement. It's house arrest at the best, and solitary confinement is much, much worse than that. And a lot of international studies into solitary confinement has argued that the damage or the psychological damage that a person who's been in a long time in solitary confinement is very, very severe, and it is the basis of post-traumatic stress, and it is a stress that stays with you for a long while.
Yes.
Until you get therapy or until you deal with the matter.
Sure.
So, coming back to the individuals, so I had as my first interrogating officer a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Henty Botha. Botha he considered himself as a super sleuth, as someone who wants to get to know everything. And I think in the process, he lost his humanity. He didn't hesitate when he was not getting the information he thought he needed. He didn't hesitate to engage in torture. And I described the instance in which one of my brothers, Yunus, was very severely tortured by him. And that matter went before the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, where people had to apply for indemnity or amnesty for that particular torture. And so Botha, and in the book I tell the story of how Botha actually transforms or mutates, it maybe is a better word, from a police officer to a killer. And he was responsible in part for the capture of Pila Poshwan Dwandwe. Although he was not involved in the killing, he knew that she was going to be killed, but he was involved in the killing of others, like the Kwamashu 3 that you named, the ones who were killed both on the ones that were killed on the Avoca Bridge, and then later others who were killed by blowing up their bodies on the railway line, and then the two Vula operatives who were killed later. So in the book you'd see how Botha becomes a policeman who then eventually becomes a killer. Then there is Lieutenant Robert Shaw, and Robert Shaw is an English guy in the security branch. I think he comes from then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, came into South Africa, got into the police. And I had a different experience with Robert Shaw. I found Robert Shaw was more a intellectual security branch guy. He wanted to understand the issues, and I think when he engaged with us, through the interrogation, he came to believe that what we believe in is something that he's not going to be able to change. But he didn't torture us, and he didn't become a brute as a result of the power that Section 29 gave him as a interrogating officer. So Section 29, when we went through the CODESA negotiations, the Nationalist Party, and I remember it was Ernest Creel and Kobe Coetzee, the Minister of Justice at the time, we were discussing in the Working Group 1 of CODESA whether we keep Section 29 of the Internal Security Act of 1982 on the books of the new South Africa. And there was an argument from their side that, we may need Section 29 and the Internal Security Act for the right-wingers who may want to disrupt our democracy. And I was given the honor in the CODESA talks to argue against Section 29 and against the Internal Security Act, which I did from my own experience. And as a result thereof, it was agreed that the Internal Security Act of 1982 will be repealed. So one of the first laws that were repealed by the Democratic Parliament of South Africa was Section 29 of the Internal Security Act of 1982.
Comrade Moe,
and I
whilst we are
take
still
that
there,
as enormous proud.
whilst we are still on that point, maybe what we need to underscore emphatically in this case, the point you are raising, is that in actual fact, the manner in which I read and understood that part of the book is that through your torture for 8 months or 9 months in the solitary confinement, you were then able to make a contribution during the CODESA discussion to say, we now need to subject these security agencies to the political direction as opposed to them standing on their own. And that, to a large extent, is what is responsible now for the state security agencies that you have that are accountable to the elected representatives in parliament. Is it a correct interpretation of that incident and your contribution?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. It's correct at two levels. First is we rejected completely to keep Section 29 of the Internal Security Act on the books of a democratic South Africa. So we repealed that law. We said no one will be ever subjected to solitary confinement ever again. And that is when you hear the words of Comrade Mandela, when he said, never again will this country detain or torture or imprison because of political views. And we did so even for the right wing. We ensured that the right wingers who may be opposed to democracy, that they too be treated with all the decency and the correctness that we need to treat political prisoners. So that's the first gain. The second gain is that as a result of what we experienced by the security branch and by the intelligence agencies, we ensured that there were checks and balances over the intelligence and security agencies. And that laws were passed in 1995, enacted by 1996, that the security branch, the police, the military, the intelligence, all became subject to supervision by the national executive, supervised by parliament, supervised by the judiciary, so that never again must we have agencies that will act outside of the law and outside of control.
Comrade Moe, time here, it really beats me. There are so many things that I wanted to address in your book, but I'm told now that you have 10 minutes. But I'm going to put 3 questions to you, and within that time, if you may respond to all of them. One will be, I'm not going to touch on many other issues that relates to your experience. But then there are 3 things that I want to address now. One is, you were young, you got into a terrain of struggle, that can actually cause you to be killed even tomorrow, because we're dealing with unraveling the secrets that surrounds the whole struggle that will determine in one way or the other as to where it was going to go. And in that process, we then discover through the bathroom officer, who changed later on to become Nightingale, that in actual fact, within our own ranks or your ranks, even in the high structures of the organization, there were people that were working for the enemy. So my question to you would be
Yeah.
that what shock did it cause to you, to your system? And then two, where go down the line, then you guys come back, well, the ANC, some of them come back to the country, and then all of a sudden there's Operation Vula, and that brings its own dynamics. Some of the things, for instance, that were said, some of the narratives that were pushed was that this was a project of a cabal, which was not known within the ranks and some leadership hierarchy of the organization. So if you can take us into confidence and comment on that. And then thirdly, then during the course of changing South Africa, this Operation Vula, I suppose, and many other things that you are not sure about, it begin to cause a lot of strife among comrades. Some of them become enemies. The relationship, for instance, between Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki becomes so strained. And at some point, you write that you had a feeling that people expected to take one of the sides. Can you comment to that? And maybe in conclusion, once you have done that, I want to ask you a question. Was it worth it?
Let me let me let me answer the last question first. So, was it worth it? Was it being involved at the level of which I was involved worth it? I must categorically say yes. It was worth it in a sense that that was the challenge of my generation. The generation that I come from had the challenge of liberating the country, and we had to do all things necessary for that liberation. And I'm incredibly proud, not only of myself, my family, the comrades that I worked with, that we rose to the challenge. We were equal to the task, and we did what we had to do. And today we enjoy our freedom and democracy, and that my children, Gibran and Kay, will grow up in a world in which they would have never known apartheid. And that, for me, is worth it more than 1,000 times. So yes, it was worth
Sure.
it. However, there were problems that came. There were problems that resulted and you were right. Comrade Mbeki and Comrade Zuma were incredibly close in the years gone by. When I met them in London, they were very, very close. And I think it is a shame, and I think it's a great sadness that those relationships broke and those relationships became what they became. And I think that did tear the ANC apart. And yes, I have a deep sadness in my heart that the ANC was not. The ANC survived decades of living in exile under worse conditions, and yet they had a unity. But when the ANC came home to democracy, within the first 2 decades of our democracy, the tensions
Sure.
in the ANC were unable to be contained, and it broke up the way it did. And that reflects a sadness for all of us who are ANC members who knew the ANC of the past and the ANC of today. But that's the way life is. Yes, in relation to it was always a difficult thing to know that people that you worked with were recruited by the other side, and the recruitment was quite detailed and quite deep into our organization. And I think we are still struggling with that kind of issue. We're still struggling how to deal with that question. And I think there are we are now starting to have debates about it. And I hope that again we will have the maturity to be able to handle, which is a very sensitive matter, uh, and be able to, as time goes by, find the kind of courage to. For me, the issue is not knowing who were the spies. The issue for me is what were the conditions that made people
Sure.
betray the very organizations? What were the conditions? Why did they do so? And for me, I would always be interested to understand that. When it comes to Operation Vula was the brainchild of Oliver Tambo. The brainchild of Oliver Tambo, in which Joe Slovo played a part with. I know that Comrade Jacob Zuma was also involved in understanding the mechanics of Operation Vula. And it was a very serious attempt by the ANC under President Owa Tambo to bring in, on a systematic basis, into the country senior ANC leadership in order to give control or coordination to the underground work, the MK work, etc. And that decision was taken and implemented in the late 80s. And I eventually, although I was not integrated into the Vula command, I played a role in providing the intelligence of Comrade Zuma to the Vula structures. So, of course, when the ANC was unbanned, not everyone knew about Operation Vula, and the enemy tried to use the fact that they discovered Operation Vula about, I think, 3 or 4 years after the operation was in place. They used it to sow division, first between the Communist Party and the ANC, which they failed. Then they tried to do it within the ANC camp. But I think all of that, in the end, didn't succeed from the enemy side. But yes, it did leave a bad taste in the mouth for many of us who felt abandoned by the ANC leadership. And as we went through the years of 91 onwards, we had to find our own peace with what happened. And I think a part of that still lingers. But again, that is life, Tembe Nkosi.
Sure. Mo, I wish we had more time. I think we still have to engage on your book. And also, among other things I'm going to wish for you, I know that you made a comment about the psychological effect Botha caused you, especially when it made you to strip in front of even the female police officers and the damage that it caused to you. But and also, I know that you had a feeling, because you expressed it, that at some point you felt used, and the organization did not protect you at a point where you thought it should have assisted you. But and what you want to say to you, that we do recognize the contribution, sterling contribution that you have made to bring South Africa where it is. And for that, I think the history of this country, more especially of our liberation, won't be told in full if your name and the contributions you made are not mentioned. We thank you for that.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much, comrade. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Comrade Mo. Thank you. Keep forward, man.
So,